Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Aloha. This is Committee on Finance will come to order. Today, for our informational briefing, we will be starting with our economist, followed by the administration's financial plan by Budget and Finance. For the members and for Dr. Bonham and Dr. Tian, this hearing is being recorded and it can be live streamed through our website, through a YouTube, and it will be cataloged and permanently saved. So we wanted to thank Dr. Tian and Dr. Bonham for joining us. I'm not sure about the sequence. Dr. Tian, did you want to go first? Let me see. Oh, maybe yeah, I don't actually see Dr. Tian. Hold on, Carl. Oh, there he is. Dr. Tian, we're ready whenever you are.
This might be an example of the need for investment in more broadband infrastructure.
We're all struggling through teleworking and remote. So maybe we'll give some. Dr. Tian, are you ready? You're muted and your video is off. Okay, while we're waiting for Dr. Tian, I just wanted to go over some of our process. So if members have questions, they'll be raising their hands remotely, and I will be calling them as they raise their hands. Just for the public, I wanted to introduce some of the members who are joining us today. I am Sylvia Luca. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee, not in any particular or alphabetical order as I see them on this screen. We have Representative Amy Peruso. If you could wave while I introduce you. Representative Tina Wildberger, Representative Lisa Martin, Representative Adrian Tam, Representative Gregor Iligan, Representative Stacy Lynn Eli, Representative Patrick Bronco, Representative Sayama, Representative Cullen, and we have, excuse me, Representative Nishimoto, and we have other members who are listening in through our YouTube feed. As I stated before, this hearing is being recorded and it will be cataloged under YouTube, and it can be live streamed through YouTube. As you can also see on the bottom of the screen, everything you say is being transcribed for the hearing impaired. So in as much as you can, if you can speak clearly and slowly so that it can be transcribed. So this is just so that, you know, we are ensuring that you know, we are efficient and getting the message to the public. Dr. Tian cannot seem to connect. So as Dr. Bonham recognized, you know, we do have issues with Zoom connection. And so because of that, Dr. Bonham, it's all yours. Just kind of think about what Eugene was gonna say. And then you heard it this morning. And so the stage is yours. And you're muted.
So Eugene's not muted anymore. Do you want me to give his talk? I don't have his slides. I'll give mine, and hopefully he'll get connected.
Yeah, why don't you start?
Sure. Let me share my screen. So unless I get a thumbs down, I'll assume everybody can see my screen. Thank you, Representative Luke, and all of the new representatives, including my new representatives. And I'm going to talk briefly about some of the changes that have happened since our forecast report in December, and I'll go over some of the details from that report, and then I'm happy to answer questions. The bottom line, and these are numbers that you've seen before, is that Hawaii has really fared very well on the virus and very poorly on the economy. And it's really what you would expect given the nature of the recession that we're in. It's one that was obviously caused by the pandemic, and it's one that focuses on really people avoiding contact, right? Avoiding connections with other people, which means that you're talking about hospitality and tourism and transportation and retail and food service all getting hit very hard. And these are, of course, areas that Hawaii excels in. And so our real gross domestic product, the things that we produce, fell almost 12% from the fourth quarter of last year to the third quarter of this year. And that's at an annualized rate. The worst in the country by far. And in fact, every state in the country had a decline with the exception of Utah. And if you look at employment losses, this is measured slightly differently. This is just the level of payroll jobs in November of 2020 compared to the level of payroll jobs in November of 2019. And again, we just like our output, we've seen the worst performance in terms of job losses at over 15% loss of payroll jobs. This doesn't include self-employed, right? This is establishment jobs. And if you were to look at the employment numbers that include self-employed, the numbers they're roughly about the same in percentage terms, but of course it's many more lost work, many more people out of work. And the one thing that really is different and sort of unique about this recession is the level of federal support that has come for Hawaii and for every state in the country. And that's why income has been so much stronger. So income is actually growing by over 10%. Again, this is from the fourth quarter of 2019 through the third quarter. And so with income growth positive, while output and jobs have both declined, really the primary explanation, the two main drivers of that growth in income have been the unemployment benefits. Actually, the three main drivers have been the unemployment benefits, and in particular, the plus up unemployment benefits, the extra $600 payments, the extra $300 weekly payments, but also the direct payments to households, those $1,200 checks that we got back in the second quarter of the year, and also the PPP loans that ended up getting counted as income by the Bureau of Economic Analysis rather than loans. They're being treated really as grants, as that was their original intent, was they would be forgivable loans. And so the issue, of course, is that this support is temporary. And while we know that we now have, at least in the first quarter of the year, additional support in the form of unemployment benefits and direct payments, the rest of the year is very, very uncertain. And we really can't expect this kind of growth in income in 2021. If you look at where the job losses have been occurring, as I mentioned, this is really a recession that's being driven by the need to avoid contact, the need to allow for physical distancing, and that hits accommodations, food service, entertainment, any kind of transport. But it's also spread throughout Hawaii. These are the first 3 quarters, through November. It's the first 11 months of the year compared to the first 11 months of 2019 growth rates. And every single sector has lost jobs. All the major sectors have lost jobs, with the exception of the federal government. Now, when these numbers are a little bit different than what you would see if you went and pulled the data off of our data portal or DBED's data warehouse or DLIR. And the reason is that we've benchmarked them, we've adjusted them for the forthcoming revisions that we'll see this spring. And we've already done that adjustment internally. And so, for example, the construction and mining jobs are down over 3% in our adjusted data for 2020. But the job losses are really everywhere. There's no place to hide unless you happen to be a federal civilian employee. Everywhere else is seeing significant job losses, from almost 40% in accommodations to minus 3.5% in contracting. And so one more slide that sort of puts things in perspective. The US, so this measures cumulative job changes. And on the left-hand side, we have job losses in millions for the US, where we saw over 21 million jobs lost between this pre-pandemic, right? From February until April, we saw over 21 million jobs lost, and then a fairly rapid recovery and then a slowing recovery. And the expectation so this is the November data, the US economy is still down almost 10 million jobs. The expectation is that December will be a relatively weak month for job growth on the US, for the US as a whole, as the surge in cases on the continent is slowing economic activity. In Hawaii, we're measuring on the right axis in thousands, and so you can see that by April we'd lost about 130,000 payroll jobs. Again, these are establishment jobs, they don't include self-employed. And then the recovery that began when we reopened after the first shelter-in-place order, we reopened in mid-May, was limited and then stalled and actually declined with the second surge that we experienced in the summer on Oahu. And then since then, the recovery has been relatively rapid with the launching of the Safe Travels program. So really between September, when we were still down almost about 125,000 jobs, we gained back about 25,000 jobs. We're still down 100,000, which is, so our recovery is very incomplete. And we really expect that recovery to slow down in coming months. This chart is showing the UHERO economic pulse, which is the dark blue line. It's a weekly economic index that we construct. The references are all down here. The index is constructed from about 17 different indicators, including deplaning visitors, passenger counts, payrolls, businesses that are open, restaurant reservations, mobility data, and it has tracked very, very well. It's measured as an index on the left axis. On the right axis, we have employment. That's total employment, includes self-employed, and the index has tracked that very, very well, predicting its behavior. And so even though we've seen a large, almost 100,000 person increase in employment since we reopened with the Safe Travels program, the index has really stalled out over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And so we're anticipating that we've seen most of the growth or most of the improvement in the labor market that came from the reopening of tourism. And we expect any additional growth to be relatively slow until we see additional visitor spending in the economy. The visitor numbers that we've seen so far this year have outpaced the assumptions that we made when we released our Q4 forecast, and roughly we are seeing, well, in the month of December, we saw roughly 7.5 thousand visitors per day. In the month of November, it was more like 5.8 thousand. And so we saw a strong December with growth compared to, or the proportion of visitors that we had in 2019. So if you look at December visitors in 2019, the December visitors in 2020 represented about 25 to 26% of that number. And that's several percentage points stronger. I think it's actually 6 or 7 percentage points stronger than what we had assumed. So it appears as if there's more pent-up demand for visiting Hawaii certainly than we had expected, particularly in the face of the surging cases on the mainland. So when we're doing these forecasts, what we're doing is we're building a set of assumptions for what the visitor recovery might look like. And those assumptions are driven in part by essentially stories about thinking about what the effects of the virus might be, what the effects of policy might be, and the surging cases that we've seen in all of our major markets, right? So these are mainland major markets, and these are the percentages of visitors in 2019 from those markets as the size of the bubble goes down. I mean, California just completely dominates that U.S. market, and their case counts are at record levels and at record levels across the entire country, right? They're essentially leading the way in terms of new COVID cases per day per 100,000 people. And so we anticipated that kind of a surge in cases would not only lead people to stay home, but would also make it harder for them to get a test and make the commitment to travel to Hawaii in the face of possibly not getting their test results before they departed. And so when we built our assumptions, and that's what these scenarios are, they're just assumptions about how many visitors we would see in December and in January and February and so on, relative to the number of arrivals we had in 2019. We assumed that December would actually be weaker than November, but what we got was closer to our optimistic scenario. And our optimistic scenario was really was based on the idea that it would be easier for people to get tests and that we would begin to see more visitors because of that. I think what we're seeing is just pure pent-up demand. Plus, we did see an increase in lift. We saw the addition of Canadian visitors in the month of December. And so going forward, I would say that something in between the optimistic, we still expect a relatively flat. So I don't expect January to grow beyond the 25 or 26% of 2019 levels and continue to see growth, at least not until the cases begin to slow down nationally. And we just saw Southern California orders to quarantine for anybody traveling into the state. So that would include people returning from Hawaii to LA are under a quarantine order. And whether or not they're able to enforce that or even try to enforce it, it may have a slowing effect on arrivals in January, February, at least until those cases get under control. But in the second half of the year, we anticipate continued growth as we see the vaccine become more widely available. And again, the uncertainty here depends on the surge in the virus, policy, by science we mean the vaccine, and a real question going forward is whether the U.S. under a new administration is able to roll out a sort of unified vaccination plan and testing programs that really are able to widely distribute and get the vaccine into the public's arms. So what that uncertainty does, those different scenarios, is they lead to uncertainty about the path of the economy that's sufficiently large that it generates a gap of over $6 billion between our sort of pessimistic scenario and our optimistic scenario, with convergence in the out years. And notice in the out years, we're still well below where we were pre-pandemic. And there's good reasons for that because of changing attitudes about tourism. There's reasons for that because of changing supply of vacation accommodations, because of changing rules about short-term vacation rentals that are now being going to be more readily enforced. And that uncertainty and those scenarios for the tourism industry also translate into scenarios that generate wide differences in employment outcomes. So from our optimistic to our pessimistic scenario, there's a 45,000 person difference in job outcomes. And we've seen a relatively slow recovery in jobs, a faster recovery in employment that includes self-employed persons, and a relatively rapid decline from a peak of around 24% to an unemployment rate today, in November, of 14.2%. So we've seen a fair amount of recovery, but in all of our scenarios, we don't get back to the sort of extremely low 2 and 3% unemployment rates during the entire forecast span all the way out to 2025. So just a few more comments about sort of the big picture. 2020 job losses of about 15%, but income gains of over 4%. And this number could go much higher for 2020, depending on whether the direct payments, those $600 checks, were actually delivered in December. I don't think there'd be very many of them that made it into people's checking accounts by December, but and then in 2021, a decline in income because of the loss of those transfer payments, because of the loss of those unemployment benefits that we saw, the plus up unemployment benefits, the PUA unemployment benefits, all expected to run out by the end of March. And without additional federal support, we're anticipating a sizable drop in real income for 2021. And then a slow recovery in jobs, because most of the job recovery, as I mentioned earlier, we anticipate that the first part of 2021 will be one of relative stability. In other words, not a lot of additional gains in employment as we sort of wait for a stronger visitor recovery in the second half of the year. And I've been finishing with a plug for our rental property survey, which I believe Phil is going to be releasing the next report on that this month. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or maybe I can turn it over to Eugene if he's on.
Yep, Dr. Tian is on now. So we'll take questions after Dr. Tian is done. Eugene, are you still having connectivity issues? Wait, let me just see. Eugene, you're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had some technical difficulties. And now I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Please
Yeah, you
proceed.
can see. Okay. All right. I think, oh, it doesn't go down. Okay. I will start with some encouraging news, just to give you a summary. Then I will go over the slides quickly. The visitor arrivals recovered by 23% in November and 26% in December, according to our calculation. So, but bankruptcy filing for the whole year 2020 is decreased by about 8.6%. As Carl presented, we do see a personal income increase while during the recession in 2020, but we do see some decrease in GDP. So the increase in personal income is mainly due to the personal transfer payment, mainly is the unemployment insurance. And we see the initial unemployment claims and has been below 5,000 level since October 17th. It has been 10 weeks. And we saw a flight from Canada resume in December. There were 26 flights from Canada in December, and there are about double, 52 flights scheduled for January. Continued encouraging news, real estate market performed well in terms of the prices. The price for both single family condo increased on all the major islands. And in terms of average daily COVID-19 cases per capita, Hawaii is the lowest, although we had triple digit over the weekend, but we still rank the lowest in the nation. And the vaccine become available widely by the middle of this year. And we have $1.7 billion federal assistance money. We received about 10.6 billion in 2020. And I believe in 2021, we may receive around 3 billion, according to my calculation. So it will be far more than the 1.7 billion currently agreed upon. The stock market has been performing well, although there are some decrease today. The outlook for the US economy has continued to improve since May 2020. Some challenging facts. We still have a high COVID-19 cases, especially in California. California now is #1, and Arizona is #2. As Carl pointed out, that California is our major visitor market for US visitors. And we have also seen increasing in other countries. The COVID-19 variant has seen in California, and today the news is found also in New York. All industries started losing payroll jobs. Unemployment rate, Hawaii is the second highest in the nation, and we also see construction activities are slowing down. So the following slides, I will show some of the summary, the detailed statistics. This is the daily new COVID-19 cases. This is in terms of per 100,000 population, which means you can view this as a per capita. So you can see that this is as of yesterday, Hawaii is still the lowest in the nation, but the nation increased a lot. California, Arizona are the top states. The one in the darker bar, it shows the 6 states that sent more than 200,000 visitors to Hawaii in 2019. And this is the number of deaths. Hawaii is also ranked the lowest in the nation. This is a cumulative deaths per 100,000 population. In terms of visitors, November, since the starting of the Safe Travel program, and before that, we had about 630 visitors. This is a pure visitor number without the returning residents, without the essential workers, without the military returning. So these pure out-of-state visitors, 630 before the beginning of the Safe Travel. And the second half of October, since it started, we had about 4,000 a day pure visitors. And in the months of November, about 6,000 a day. And in December, it was about 8,000 a day. So that recovery was 26%. But over the weekend, the number decreased. is because of the California. It became #1 in terms of the new COVID-19 cases. So the average for the 3 days of January is about 5,700. And this is talking about the bankruptcy filings. I sent this presentation last week, but over the weekend in December number became available. December number increased only by 1 case. So that made the whole year 2020 available because of the federal government assistance, the $10.6 billion to the state. Our businesses, the filing for bankruptcy is decreased by 8.6% for the whole year 2020. And this shows the business operating status. And we did the survey along with other 16 private partners. This is the 3rd survey concluded in the middle of December. The first survey was done in July, indicating that the business closed was 24%. And the second survey was done in September, with the second Honolulu shutdown. The business close was 24%. And now this one in December, the business still close is 10.7%. But for all these 3 surveys, the first column, how many businesses were never closed, that's about 40%. So that number is pretty consistent, which means that during, especially in April, late March, April period, 60% of our businesses were closed temporarily. And this shows the business expectation or their estimate about their revenue change. You can see that about 86.3% of those businesses, they indicate that they would increase they will decrease revenue in 2020. So the largest decrease is over 50%, 38.8% of those respondents saying that they will decrease their revenue by 50 or more percent. But that largest group decreased by about 10 percentage points for 2021. But still we have 81.3% of the businesses indicating that they will decrease in revenue in 2021. There will be some improvement, but a slow improvement, not a significant one. And this shows the Hawaii, the GDP growth compared with the US. So if you look at the most recent business cycles since 2000, Hawaii has been following the US. Most of the time, the economic growth rate were the same. Actually, in the last 20 years, Hawaii's economic growth rate was 2% per year, average annual 2%. And the US economic growth rate was also 2% per year for the same period. But in the last recession in 2009, Hawaii decrease was higher than the US. And the current recession, Hawaii's the economic growth rate dropped by 13.9% in the second quarter and 8.2% in the third quarter, while the US was 9% in third quarter, 2.8% in the third quarter. And looking at the industries, you can see that the tourism industry got hit the hardest. Those 2 major industries, leisure and hospitality, they lost GDP by more than 50%. And second is the transportation, is a major component of the tourism industry, is also decreased by 26.1%. And I think Carl covered this already. The phenomena is to me especially, is very special for this recession. Is during the recession year, we have seen a big increase in the personal income, but at the same time, we see a decrease in the GDP. So the personal income increase is 8.2% for the first 9 months. That's mainly is because of the transfer payment. The unemployment insurance compensation is actually increased by over 4,000%. So that is the major increase in the personal income. So in terms of the retail sales, the top line shows this is the survey by the US Census Bureau. They survey all the retail stores, and their sales compared with the same months in previous year. You can see that almost every month since March, the total sales of the stores is decreased. It continued to decrease up to September, which is the latest month. And but one store, you look at the building materials and the garden equipment and the supplies, is never decreased during this pandemic period. And that it means actually the construction materials has been had good sales. And in terms of the looking at the economic indicators, we have this real GDP compared with the real DET, the general excise tax, deflated by the Honolulu Price Index. So in a normal year, you can see that the growth rate of our economy, which is measured by the real GDP and the real general excise tax, is about the same. It's a similar growth rate. But in the recession times, for example, in the 2009, 2008, Hawaii actually started the recession earlier than the US is in 2008. So you can see the GET decrease is about 15%. But in the nominal terms, it wasn't like this. But because in those time, 2007, 2008, the Hawaii's inflation rate was about 5%, was very high. So the high inflation rate, it means a increase in the general excise tax in nominal terms. But if you deflate by the price, the real increase is a different story. So it's a decrease in started actually in 2007 and go into the recession. And this time during this recession, we also see the GET decrease is bigger than the economy. I think there are several reasons. I think one is that our recession is mainly caused by the visitor spending. And the visitor spending actually contribute more to the state GE tax than the local spending. In our local resident spending has more leakage than visitors. Most of the, if not all, the visitor spending, they are subject to the 4% GE tax. So according to our estimate, the tourism contribution to Hawaii's GDP was 16.2% in 2019, but a contribution to state tax was 22.6%. Is higher, is about 6 percentage points higher than the GDP. With the decrease in visitor spending, both in the previous recession and the current recession, the GET will decrease more. So this shows the GET, at least in the last few months, the GET has been stable, has been flat. And the decrease in November collection was about $52.4 million. And looking at the individual income tax, so the income tax is not as bad as the GE tax. Actually, during the last few months, during the recession, the pandemic, the GE tax, GET decreased by about 25%, but the income decrease is very small. So if we look at this period from August, the decrease only 6.6%. There was a huge increase in July is because of the shifting of the deadline. This has something consistent with the increase in personal income. I think those federal assistance money, I think there are people already believe that some of these federal money, assistance money, may be subject to individual income tax. So they have an increase in their declaration of estimated tax. So I will skip this one. You will see this by item. From May to November, you can see the GET decrease is about 25%. I think this will be the worst in our economy. The decrease from tourism plus the residential, the local economy is about 25%. My estimate part is about 15% from tourism and maybe 10% from a local economy. So the visitor contribution to the economy, according to our estimate, was about 16 to 17%. If you look at the individual income tax, it was an increase by 0.9%, because this includes the July number, which is the new filing deadline for last year. If you look at the declaration estimated tax, it's actually an increase, and the payment with returns is also an increase by 73.2%. So one thing we may want to see is this withholding tax on wages is decreased by 6.7%. It's a lot or less than the job decrease. I think the payroll job decrease, according to our calculation, is about 17.3%. And that's non-agricultural payroll jobs. I think we did lose about over 100,000 payroll jobs, but I think the job lost is mainly maybe due to the part-time or maybe less seniority jobs because of the withholding on wages didn't decrease by double digit. And interesting, I think significant is that the transit accommodation tax, TAT, is decreased by about 91%, which is consistent with the tourism. This shows that at the beginning of the pandemic, we lost 124,000 jobs, and now we still lost over 100,000. So the recovery is about 24,000 jobs. And by industry, is still tourism. It's consistent with the GDP. The number one industry lost jobs, over 50%, is leisure and hospitality, followed by transportation. And this shows another indicator of the labor market. So the initial unemployment claims decrease below 5,000 for 10 weeks. The latest one is December 26th. The number is actually below 4,000. And this shows unemployment rate. Hawaii was the star in the last 20-some years. Since November 2000, actually, Hawaii's unemployment rate has been below the US since November 2000. Hawaii actually was the second lowest between 2015 and 2019. And now Hawaii is the second highest unemployment rate in the nation. And in terms of the GDP growth, Hawaii is the lowest in the nation among all the states. So the most recent month is actually is in November. Hawaii's unemployment rate was 10.1%, while the US was 6.4%. And this is talking about the private residential building permit. If you look at the total statewide, it decreased by 5.6%. So the decrease is mainly occurred during the last few months. The first half year was an increase, and the last 2-3 months it was a decrease. The decrease is mainly happening on the city county of Honolulu. So that's indicating next year, this year, 2021, the construction industry may be a little slowdown in the private building area. It may have a stable or some increase in the government CIP project. And this shows the real estate market. When you look at the median housing price, and also for single family and the condo, other than Kauai has a small decrease on condo price, but they all increase. So this is due to a very short in the inventory is on the supply side, and the demand is still there. But if you look at the total sales, is actually, especially for condo homes, is the double-digit decrease. For all the homes, including single-family condos, for the first 9 months in the state, the total volume sales is actually decreased by about 15%. A single-family decreased by 2.5%, and condo sales decreased by about 25%. And this number is only multiple listing. For on a typical year, we have about 20,000 homes sold. About 15,000 were listed by multiple listing, about 5,000 not listed. So either sold by developer or sold by the owner themselves without multiple listing. And this shows that the home sales by the residence of purchaser, residence of buyer, you can see that the local purchase has been strong, although it was a decrease in the third quarter, but in the third quarter this year, it resumed. It became pretty strong. And then on the mainland also is increased in the third quarter. International has been declining. I think now is only about 1% of the total. 10 years ago, local residents purchase accounted for about 70%, and now is accounted for about 80%. The 2010 mainland purchase is about 30%, and now the mainland purchase is about 18%. So it's a decrease. The main demand, over 80% is still from our local residents. And this shows the projection, economic projection by Blue Chip is 50 economic forecasting organizations. They forecast most of the countries in the world had a recession in 2020, including the US. There are 2 countries, our economies, they have a positive growth, that's China and Taiwan. But in 2021, most of the economy will have a strong growth. But Hawaii, the growth, according to our projection, it may not be as strong as the other countries. And our growth may be just at about 2% average, like the 20 years growth rate. And this shows the scheduled air seat, the most recent. We know that, see this Canada, we have recovered some in the 26 flights in December, but in January, if you look at the air seat by those 52 flights, the recovery is about 20%. So this is a decrease by 80%. That means recovery compared with January 2020, recovery is about 20%. Overall, for the market, the recovery is about 50%, 50% recovery in terms of seat, and it will be 70% in February. And our projection for visitor arrivals, and I think our projection is similar to UHERO's optimistic scenario. I think we will have a 60% recovery in 2021, about the 6 million visitors. Our assumption is that the visitor arrival recovery will be about 30%, because December was 26%. Our assumption would be 30% in January and going up to 50% by the middle of the year. Then it will go up after the middle of the year, and it will reach about 80% by the end of this calendar year. So that is our projection. The economic growth rate will be about 2.1% and 2%. So this is the normal growth rate for the last 20 years. I believe that concludes my presentation, and I will stop sharing and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bonham, and thank you, Dr. Tian. I know we tried to do the virtual hand, but then if you think that's too humbug, you can also raise your hand. But I see Rep Peruso, and if other people have questions, if you can raise your virtual hand in the meantime. Go ahead, Rep Peruso.
Thank you, Dr. Bonham and Dr. Tian. That was super useful. I have a question for Dr. Bonham. And I had the privilege of listening to your discussion during the WAM hearing. And I think it was you that made the comment about furloughs not necessarily being the best approach. And I wanted to ask for your views on what's happening with the Department of Education. So you're probably aware that last year, the department offered up $95 million as a cut when the governor asked departments for cuts, and the DOE was one of the few departments that did that. And then this year, the cuts that are being asked of the department amount to about 165 million on top of that, right? And then if you factor in the furloughs, which are estimated to be about 132 million, that's, you know, about $400 million, that's being cut from the DOE budget. And we have been paying a lot of attention to furloughs, but I'm sure that you've done this math, because of the cuts from this year, because of WSF, weighted student formula, that means that 1,850 teachers are going to lose their jobs. So I'm wondering if you think that's the wise approach to this economic crisis.
So thank you for that question. Thank you, Tarzal. I'm thankful that it's not my job to balance the budget. It's not my job to balance the budget. And so, having said that, having said no is cutting state spending will make the economy will prolong the downturn. And so that's really the perspective that we're coming from. It's about the economy. Now, when you're talking about education, there's an added element to that. The problem with cutting DOE in those kinds of numbers is and doing what often amounts to across the board. You're doing potential damage that is long term, both the system, but certainly to the children. Children are receiving diminished services. But if that continues for an extended period of time because of the cuts, we're doing damage not only today, but every dollar that a school teacher is somewhere between $1 and $2 spending in then you're also doing longer term, lower education outcomes, reduce long-term earnings for children. And so, you know, in some of the things that we've been talking about on the House Select Committee is the need to be investing in education for our both short run and long term. So I don't have a solution for how you balance the budget. You know, we did write a piece, Jim Mack and myself and Bob Ebel, early on about closing the budget gap. And, you know, obviously some of the things that we were suggesting was borrowing, which I know that the administration and the legislature has supported that. And that's a recommendation that's based on the idea of if we can shorten the recession by not cutting in the middle of it, that's a good thing. And we can dig our way out of that borrowing over a longer period of time, whether it's from growing the economy more rapidly or raising tax revenues in some form or making more precise cuts down the road. Right? That's another thing that we talked about in this report on closing the budget gap is doing what we can to focus the reductions in spending rather than making them across the board, and think about ways of making government and DOE and UH and everything that we do much more, you know, really asking for each individual program, what do we have to do, what do we need to do, and what can we do without.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you. Any other questions? Rep. Martin.
Hi, thanks again for the talk. I'm interested in understanding more about the need for job creation. I wonder if we actually need to go back to the same number that we had before, or has there been a significant outmigration of people that perhaps came here from somewhere else to work in the tourist industry? That's one part of the question. The other part is, to what extent do you think that some of our continued job loss or unemployment is because the incentives, financial incentives to go back to work are going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I guess, unless Eugene, you want to take that or you want me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
I'll try not to be as long-winded as with my first answer. I guess I wouldn't be too worried at where we are right now about having financial incentives to avoid work, given that we've only seen a recovery of visitor arrivals of about 20% of where we were a year ago, and spending presumably is below that, given the lower prices for hotel rooms and other things. So I don't think there's too much risk that we're sort of paying people not to go find jobs that don't exist, right? That really aren't available right now. I understand the concern, but I don't think that's probably the primary thing to worry about at this point. Whether or not we need to get back to the same level of employment, I mean, there is some evidence that that people are leaving. There's also evidence that people are arriving. And the challenge, of course, is that the people who are leaving, while some of them may be temporary workers, so you can imagine, young adults who came here to surf and work in Waikiki have gone home, and that's very likely, given that if you don't have work, it's awfully hard to put a roof over your head and pay the rent, et cetera. But some of those people who are leaving are also, our keiki and our family, and so there's, it's kind of hard to make that balance. I think it is true, and we know that population has been declining. It's also aging. So many of the people who left employment are also retirees, and won't necessarily be re-entering the labor force. But we have seen a pretty robust increase in total employment, which includes the self-employed. And in terms of replacing those jobs, I think the key thing is really that we make it as easy as possible for people to sort of retrain and reposition themselves for the kinds of jobs that are available, and some of them being new types of work, whether it's delivering restaurant meals or pop-up businesses, and sort of allow for that possibility of people to go back to school, for example, to get back to education and to change careers.
I just want to add that I think Carl was right. In the last 4 years, between 2017 and 2020, according to the U.S. Census Bureau estimate, we lost population 4 years in a row. The total population loss was 22,000. That's equivalent to about 5,500 per year. And I think currently the main economic strategy from my own personal economic view is that I think the first phase, I think, is the survival. We want to make the business to survive. I think currently the federal money did do a good job because the bankruptcy fighting decreased in 2020. I think that is mainly the help from the federal government assistance, the federal assistance. And I think for statewide, I think we should keep our population, that is the supply of our labor. Once the economy returns and we need more people to work in the industries, I think currently we do see that we lost about 17% of our payroll jobs. But when you look at the tax withholding from wages, it didn't decrease by 17%, decreased by about 7%. So it means that the people remaining work, and they are more senior, and actually the productivity, I did some calculation, we did see some productivity increase temporarily at this time. It's actually our productivity, what surprised me, is higher than the US. We always lower than the US, but now it's higher than the US. But I think for the long term, we should have those people get ready to be back in the labor force. Even many of these unemployed, they are part-time, they are new workers, and they have they are junior, not a lot of experience, but they will be the future for the economy. So we want to keep all these people to be available for future work.
Any other question? Rep Tam.
Thank you, Dr. Bonham, and thank you, Dr. Tian, for your amazing presentation. So my question is about the vaccine, and how much does the vaccine put into your economic models and forecasts? I know that we have a third one coming up. It's AstraZeneca, and if that one becomes widely available, does your economic forecast change for the better? And what do we need to do to make that happen?
So that actually gets back a little bit to what Eugene was saying about needing to sort of make sure that we weather the initial part of this crisis. And the number one thing that we have done in Hawaii is after a few missteps, we really got the public health part of this right. And the recession that we're dealing with is really one that is the result of people not wanting to interact, wanting to be physically distanced to avoid the spread of the virus. And so the combination of following good public health guidelines and getting as many people vaccinated as possible in as quick a period of time as possible, those are two very, very important elements of a recovery plan, right? So yes, having a third vaccine, but most importantly, getting the vaccine out and convincing as many people, getting out the message of vaccine safety and the importance of it is really crucial to the short-term recovery. And our forecast actually did improve in the second half of 2021 once it became clear that once we had solid evidence of the first two vaccines. The caveat to all that is that the rollout nationally has been slower than expected. I'm not sure if it's been slower than expected for Hawaii, but we face a really big challenge, right? We haven't, if you think about the extent of the testing that we've been doing so far and how challenging that has been at times with surge testings and things like that, we now have to do even more than that with the vaccination. And so it's incredibly important, and it will raise our forecast when the better news we have on the pandemic, on vaccination and on controlling the pandemic, the better the forecast will get.
In our forecast, we did assume that the vaccine will be widely used by the middle of this year. So that's why we assume the first half year, the visitor recovery will be slow. Actually, because of the high degree of uncertainty, if we would do the forecast today, the projection would be a little different because the new development over the weekend, and we assume the January recovery will be 30%. But the first 3 days up to January 1st to the 3rd, the recovery compared with the previous year, the same month, was only about 18%. So it's likely that the 30% may not be reached as we expected. So I think we did expect there will be, since the middle of the year, after the middle of the year, the visitor recovery will be faster, will be over 50% from 60% in July to 80% in December. But for the first half year, it will be 30% to 50%.
So, what Eugene is talking about is the role of vaccination and the virus really on the continent, but also in Canada and elsewhere, and that role, the effect that has on tourism. And tourism is the number one way to get the recovery up to speed, right? So I'm not talking about getting back to where we were in 2018 or 2019, but if we want to put as many people as possible back to work, and then tourism is the way to do that. Having said that, what we can control is how we distribute the vaccine locally and how we manage that. And the better job we do at that, the better our local economy will do, regardless of what's happening with tourism.
Okay, and then we have Representative Wildberger, followed by Representative Martin.
Thanks so much. I appreciate both of your presentations. I noticed in the Department of Health's budget, they're looking at 31.5 million in immunization costs, with only 12.6 in 2021, and then 18.9 in 2022, which led me to be concerned that they're not planning on getting everybody in Hawaii vaccinated this year, or maybe this is all immunizations and there are other programs. But I think immunization is going to be the key, as Representative Tam pointed out, to our being able to return. I'm also concerned that we have a race to the bottom happening. If you watch what's going on, the disparate difference in what's happening on Kauai and Maui, we have surging cases on Maui, bottom of the lowest common denominator barrel of tourists coming there, with little consideration for the fact that the virus is still active. And then on Kauai, we see their very careful, methodic planning to bring in higher end, better bang for the buck, high value tourists with their careful 3-day bubble plan. Are we looking at a scenario where we are going to be able to reimagine our tourism, or are we just going back as fast as possible to the untenable situation that we had prior to the pandemic of unmitigated, unmanaged, and mostly undesirable tourism marketing? Thank you.
That must be a question for Eugene.
That's a good question for Hawaii Tourism Authority.
I mean, it is. That's the right. I mean, we don't do the marketing planning, but we've written about it. Jim Mack and Frank Haas and Paul Brubaker have written several pieces about reimagining tourism and repositioning tourism. And you know, it's tough because you kind of need to do both at the same time, right? You want to bring back tourist dollars, and obviously you want to bring back the highest spending tourists possible, as quickly as possible, while you simultaneously, decide what you want the future to look like and build that system. And there are some examples of some small changes that have happened on Oahu with the reopening of Hanauma Bay and the reopening of Diamond Head. And I would suggest that both of those have been poorly thought out because I would suggest that both of them should be charging more for those facilities. I could imagine that visitors would be willing to pay much more to go to Hanauma Bay than we are charging. And particularly if they could use a reservation system online, which is what all the restaurants in the state have had to go to. Everybody has had to go to an online present, but we can't seem to manage that. We've got to have people waiting in line to get into, I also think we could charge much more at to hike Diamond Head. And both of those need significant investments in infrastructure and education and protection. So sorry, I'm ranting a little bit, but I think we have an opportunity, whether we pull it off. It is in it is part of the HTA's master plan to reimagine and really go towards a smart tourism market. So we'll have to wait and see what they do. Sort of our job to apply the pressure, I guess.
Thank you. And just as a quick follow-up, is it possible to get better detailed numbers?
Rep Wildberger, you want to, I think Dr. Tian wanted to respond as well, and then go to your next question.
Yeah, thank you. I think the Hawaii Tourism Authority has been put because the measure we talk about is always the number of arrivals. We have 10 million visitors, but the Hawaii Tourism Authority has been always using the visitor spending as the target. So they try to increase the visitor spending rather than the visitor arrivals. So attracting more high spending visitors. Actually, when we see the economy, actually 2019, our GDP growth was only 0.3%. It's basically no growth. But if you look at it, the real visitor spending in 2019, it was negative. So the visitor expenditure is the target for Hawaii Tourism Authority, not the number of arrivals. But I think in the short term is that would be in the long-term plan, what kind of visitors we should attract. But in the short term, I think it is very difficult to select what type of visitors to come back. I think we have the supply, and we have insufficient demand. I think in the short term, it may be the opening of tourism is more important, I think.
So can I follow up with that? So I understand that it's been in the Hawaii Tourism Authority's plan for actually about as long as I can remember to raise visitor spending. And so given that, you really have to conclude that they have failed. And because real visitor spending hasn't grown. I mean, other than a few years of rapid growth in real visitor spending after the Great Recession, or in recovery, right? I mean, 2019 real visitor spending was likely the same as it was in 1990, maybe 1991, and notwithstanding, data problems and differences in measurement and so on, that's not a recipe for improving things. But it's not just Hawaii Tourism Authority; it's also county policy and state policy, and in particular, after City and County of Honolulu passed ordinance trying to enforce short-term vacation rental rules, we actually saw growth in short-term vacation rental statewide because there was faster growth on all the neighbor islands while short-term vacation rentals were in decline on Oahu. I don't think that's likely to continue, and I think that higher room rates and good occupancy rates in hotels and timeshares at higher rates is one way of approaching a higher spending visitor.
Rep. Wildberger, you can follow. Oh, what happened?
Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks. One quick follow-up. I saw a couple slides that had neighbor island breakdown, but just in general, it would be super useful, especially for neighbor island representatives, to have your incredible data granular down to what's happening, for instance, on Maui or Kauai, because our numbers are so much more significant as far as employment, that kind of thing. We've got only a 20% reemployment, 130,000 unemployed to 100,000 still unemployed. The situation's pretty dire on Maui, and to have that data enunciated, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comment. So it is we do report that actually in our forecast reports. We are doing all the scenarios at the county level, but in terms of, as you said, enunciating it, I appreciate the comment.
Albert or Nan, the slides that were provided by Dr. Tian and Dr. Bonham.
We do report that actually in our forecast.
Yes, Chair.
That's in our folder that members have access to, right?
They're in the folder and on the Finance Committee page.
Okay, great. So now we have Representative Martin followed by Representative Peruso.
So my question was really related to the most recent discussion brought up by Rep. Wildberger. I just wanted to find out, can you folks share with us through the chair data on visitor spending instead of number of visitors?
Yes, I can do that. I think the number is also available in the data warehouse. We have a special data warehouse, and actually the UHERO developed for us is has the visitor, all the visitor, especially for visitors, by market, by destination. We have that, but I also have a longer history than that. And I can email to Chair Luke. I will email her after this meeting, so then she can distribute to the people who need it.
Okay, as soon as we get it from Dr. Tian, we'll post it.
Or if you want a really easy way to see the data, you can visit our data portal at data.uhero.hawaii.edu, and all the visitor spending and jobs are available, income by county, by state, in graphical form and tables as well.
Thank you, Representative Peruso.
This question is for Dr. Tian. I saw one slide, you're talking about home sales, and it's just a quick clarifying question. Are you talking, and you were comparing local buyers as compared to those from the continent and those from abroad? And I was wondering if you were looking, I couldn't see, my eyesight is getting bad. If you're looking at number of sales or the value of the sales?
Yeah, the number I show on the slides is actually the number of sales, the volume, not the value. The value is the volume, not the value. It's the number of sales.
Okay, good. And then on the same database, can I find a breakdown of the value? So I'm interested in whether purchases from the continent, if they're buying more expensive houses.
Yes, that's actually, I only show part of it. The data is in our data book and also in the quarterly statistical and economic report. We do that every quarter. The most recent quarter was released in early December. And that number includes the third quarter 2020. So the table, if you look at the table E9 and table E10, it has the number of sales as well as the value of sales by all the three, local residents, mainlander, and the foreigner.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the data did show that the foreigner purchase is average about over $1 million. The mainlander purchase is 800,000 and above, and the local residence is at about 600,000 level.
So one of the challenges there is that they're also buying different types of properties, right? So you're mixing condos and single family and things like that.
But it's divided, it's all residential, correct? Or
it's all residential, yeah. Okay. So we did divide it by single family and the condo.
Perfect, thank you so much.
Thank you. We have Representative Bronco with a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Before the crisis, which industries or which sectors showed the greatest potential and growth? Like, what do you think is our newest or our possible greatest competitive advantages to shift our economy post-COVID?
Yeah, let me go first, then Carl can elaborate more. I think according to, based on the employment data, the job data and the GDP data, there are 4 sectors showing a long-term growth. And I think people treat that as is mainly driven by the local sectors. The first one is actually the tourism. We consider that to be a traded sector. There is actually most of these in tourism, most of them are export. All the visitor spending about $18 billion, they are exports. So they are traded sector. And the second one is actually the healthcare. The healthcare has been growing faster in the last 20 years. That's why we are saying the economy has been already diversifying, because the tourism contribution in 1988, it was 1/3. It's about 33%, but now it's only about 16%. So the other sector growing is one is the healthcare, which is a local economy, mostly serving the local people. There is a very little component are of traded, exported, but a majority are local economy. The other one is called professional and business services. Professional services is including those legal, engineering services, accounting services. So those professional and business services, and they growing also pretty fast. Another one is construction. So construction industry has been growing is mainly because of our real estate market has been doing good in the last 10 years. A lot of out-of-state investment, a lot of the foreign investment coming into the state that make the construction industry has been increasing. So those basically those three sectors: construction, the professional services, and healthcare. They are mainly local oriented business, and tourism is another one. Although they have diversified, the contribution to the economy is diminishing, but the sector has been, if you look at it, they are pretty much leveled in terms of real dollars. The visitor spending in terms of real dollars, it has not been growing, but at least they have been kept a higher percentage. It's still number one industry, but it's decreased from 33 to 16.
So if I can add to that a little bit. So Eugene mentioned several times the distinction between traded and local. And so that the challenge, so and I agree with him that healthcare, I've often referred to healthcare as the Energizer Bunny of job growth. And that's partly because we're all getting older. There's not a whole lot we can do about that. And we're going to consume more healthcare as we age. And it is the advantage of it is a relatively high paying field. And it is true that it has grown really year after year after year. Construction is highly variable, right? It swings dramatically over the business cycle. But to get back to the distinction between traded and non-traded, the non-traded employment and clusters of industries really over a long period of time will not grow any faster than your overall population. It'll end up growing at whatever the rate of your fundamental population growth is. And given our decline in population, and I mean, at least right now, our forecast is for population decline to actually accelerate a little bit over the next couple of years. That, you know, growing the non-traded clusters, the local clusters is really not how you raise all boats, if you will. We're not going to improve our standards of living by growing that sector of economy, at least not nearly as much as the traded sector. Having said that, the traded sector, the biggest piece of that is obviously hospitality and tourism. And if you look at employment in the hospitality and tourism traded cluster since the late 90s, it's down 0.3%. So I'm talking about the traded cluster data that's on our data portal that we collect from from Harvard, from their US cluster mapping project. And really tourism, this is consistent with the idea that real tourism spending hasn't changed. We haven't seen growth other than the boom bust cycles. The business services that Eugene referred to is part of that. The fastest growing traded cluster over that time period is in education and knowledge creation. It's in R&D. It's in, and actually we have a report on our website about clusters in the state and points out, and this is true particularly on the Big Island, but actually on all of the in all the counties, the education and knowledge creation cluster is one of the highest paying clusters. It's also small, but it also has been one of the fastest growing clusters. And so is really an area, I think, for continued focus.
Thank you.
you. Any other questions? If not, we just wanted to thank Dr. Bonham and Dr. Tian. You continue to be a really great resource for the legislature, and Happy New Year to the both of you. And Dr. Bonham, I wish you luck as you have your upcoming Council on Revenues meeting this week. And we will be relying on your number. So thank you both for your continued assistance and help. And I know both of you did a tremendous amount of work during the interim as well. So we will allow both Dr. Tian and Dr. Bonham to sign out, and we will invite BNF to come into this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
To the committee. I'm Craig Hirai, the Director of Finance, and with me is Deputy Director Robert Yu. My presentation will cover the following, my testimony covers the following: the administration's approach to the fiscal biennium budget, the program review. I'm Craig Hirai, the Director of Finance, and with me is Deputy Director Robert Yu. My presentation will cover. Getting a little, anyway, sorry. Budget and fiscal considerations, constitutional and statutory requirements, budget transparency, a synopsis of the executive biennium budget requests, operating and capital improvement program, multi-year general fund financial plan based on the Council on Revenues, September 9th, 2020 revenue projections, and general fund expenditure ceiling requirement to provide a tax refund or credit and deposit to the emergency and budget reserve fund and state debt limit. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in unemployment rate rising sharply from 2.4% in March 2020 to 23.8% in April 2020. It is now, and as of November 2020, it's at 10.1%. Year to year through November 2020, total visitor arrivals have decreased by 77%. It may be years before tourism returns to pre-pandemic levels. Those in the tourism industry, as well as other related industries such as restaurants and entertainment, are suffering severely. The growth of preliminary general fund tax collections for FY20 decreased from 7.5% positive in February 2020 before COVID-19 restrictions were imposed to minus 6.3% by the end of the fiscal year. In April of 2020, the state received $862.8 million in federal funds pursuant to the CARES Act. Congress recently passed a stimulus bill that the president signed into law. Our understanding is that these federal funds can be used directly to support costs for the DOE and Department of Health COVID-19 mitigation efforts. Additionally, it provides supplementary funding for the University of Hawaii, mental health and substance abuse, emergency rental assistance, childcare, airports, and highways. We will work with the affected departments and the legislature to make the appropriate adjustments to the budget. You know, the budget was submitted on December 21st, I believe. President signed the Stimulus Act, after Christmas. So we are still in the process of reviewing how exactly the Stimulus Act will affect the general fund budget. Principally in the area of proposed emergency appropriations. The administration has implemented measures to decrease general fund expenditures, including restrictions and hiring freeze on non-critical general funded positions in FY21. We have also suspended pre-funding of other post-employment benefits pursuant to Act 268 through the governor's emergency powers. The state ended FY20 with a general fund balance of approximately $1 billion. However, this extraordinarily large balance is due to the 2020 legislature authorizing $303 million in general fund to general obligation bond swaps and special fund transfers, and a $345 million transfer from the EBRF to the general fund. thereby increasing the FY20 general fund budget balance by $248 million. All departments were asked to review their planned expenditures and find innovative ways to deliver essential services and trim costs. We expect these restrictive fiscal controls will need to continue through the remainder of the fiscal year and beyond. These measures are in addition to the sizable reductions made to FY21 general fund appropriations by the 2020 legislature. Given the magnitude and consequences of these actions, we took out a $750 million working capital loan to provide short-term liquidity through the end of FY21 to give the administration and the legislature time to consider the best options to balance the budget going forward. The loan will be paid back over 5 fiscal years 22 through 26. Savings due to revised projections for fixed costs for the continuation and suspension of OPEB payments for 4 more years will help alleviate some of the shortfall. Program review reductions and furloughs are also integral parts of the administration's plan to reduce the balance of the projected shortfall, but revenue enhancements are also needed to fill the gap. We understand that furloughs will unfortunately cause hardships for many, and while difficult, they will allow us to avoid layoffs for roughly 4,000 people. With respect to program reviews, we asked departments to propose reductions to meet targets of 10%, 15%, and 20% of Act 5 SLH 2019. The reduction proposals were reviewed based on statewide priorities, and the decisions regarding the identified reductions have been incorporated into the biennium budget request. We realize that reductions of this magnitude are extremely difficult, as all programs have value, but we must position the state to deal with the ongoing significant economic downturn that will impact the state for many years. While no one can predict how long the pandemic will last, we are hopeful that continuing our mitigation measures and the availability of vaccines will help us recover from this pandemic. As such, the administration will be requesting, through specific legislation, emergency appropriations for FY21 beginning January 1, 2021 through June 30, 2021, and appropriations for FY22 for the substantial funding requirements to support COVID-19 mitigation efforts. COVID-19 mitigation costs the state must now cover currently are estimated to be $205 million for FY21 and $182 million for FY22. We will work closely with the legislature to ensure that sufficient resources are appropriated for these mitigation efforts. In addition, we will be submitting several other emergency appropriation bills for FY21, which total over $82.5 million. These appropriations are necessary to provide critical support to the respective programs for the remainder of FY21. Such requests include but are not limited to $20 million for DOE's food service program deficit, $5.4 million for the general assistance program under the Department of Human Services, and $1.5 million for the Stadium Authority. Based on a preliminary assessment, the recently approved federal stimulus bill should help defray $120 million of DOH's estimated COVID-19 mitigation costs, $67 million in FY21 and $52 million in FY22, $31.5 million of Department of Health's estimated immunization costs, 12.6 million in FY21 and 18.9 million in FY22, and 62 million of DOE's estimated FY21 emergency appropriation requirements for workers' compensation, teacher differentials, converged infrastructure, financial management system, licensing and maintenance, and the above-mentioned food service program deficit. As indicated earlier, we will work with the affected departments and the legislature to make the appropriate adjustments to the budget. We are under the Constitution, we're required to submit a biennium budget on a 6-year, under HRS section 3769, the governor must prepare a 6-year program and financial plan encompassing all state programs, as well as a CIP budget. Let's see. To increase budget transparency, departments were instructed to review their FY21 operating budget details for items that did not align with anticipated expenditures and could be addressed immediately. Such department review was to include, but would not be limited to, the following: negative adjustments, unfunded, underfunded, and unbudgeted positions, and specific budget line items which do not align with anticipated expenditures. Section 37-74F, Hawaii Revised Statutes, and Section 42 of Act 5 prohibit funds from being expended to fill a permanent or temporary position for the lowest level of a program if the filling of that position causes the position ceiling for that level of the program to be exceeded. Position ceiling is defined as the maximum number of permanent and temporary positions that an expending agency is authorized for a particular program. Consequently, it was highly recommended that all departments review their unbudgeted positions. All unbudgeted positions that are critical and ongoing were to be identified and incorporated into the budget. Because the unbudgeted positions are currently funded, only cost-neutral requests were allowed. Departments were also specifically advised to review positions that were not funded. General funded programs with unfunded positions deemed critical for department operations were advised to submit trade-off and transfer requests to fund such positions. As such, the biennium budget includes the following: conversion of unbudgeted positions requests to authorize unbudgeted positions through trade-off and transfer of funding and position counts. Trade-off and transfer adjustments requests necessary to fully fund underfunded or unfunded positions if the positions are deemed critical. Trade-off and transfer adjustment requests necessary to correct negative amounts or realign the budget to expenditures. Base adjustment requests to delete underfunded and or unfunded positions. For the fiscal biennium, total operating budget requests from all sources of funding amount to 15.417 billion in FY22 and 15.21 billion in FY23, resulting in decreases of 1.8% and 1.1% respectively below the current levels appropriated for FY21 in Act 5. Decreases are primarily due to suspension of pre-funding for OPEB, program review reductions for general funded programs, and reduced retirement benefit payments, which are offset by escalating other non-discretionary costs, general fund, such as general funds for debt service, health premium payments, and federal and general funds for Medicaid. Total requests for general fund amounts to 7.686 billion for FY22 and 7.798 billion for FY23, which represents a decrease of 361.9 million in the first year and 249.6 million in the second year over the FY21 appropriation levels. Increased non-discretionary requests are offset by decreases due to suspension of pre-funding for OPEB, program review reductions, and reduced retirement benefit payments. For the fiscal biennium, total requests for capital improvements amount to 1.236 billion in FY22 and 1.116 billion in FY23. Of these amounts, we have requested a total of less than 1.2 billion in GO bond funds for FY22 and 23. The requested projects are necessary to maintain and improve our state facilities and resources to allow our programs to better serve Hawaii's people. It makes good sense to invest now while interest rates are low to meet these priority needs. This will help reduce debt service costs while creating jobs and sustaining our construction industry. Attachment 1 is the multi-year general fund financial plan submitted to the legislature on December 21st and is based on the core September 9th, 2020 general fund tax and non-tax revenue projections. It is noted that when compared to the Corps' March 11, 2020 projections, there are annual revenue losses of about 1.4 billion and greater for the period from fiscal year 22 through fiscal year 27. I don't think we can go through that later. They have, it's part of the testimony.
Director, what are you trying to do, Director?
I've got the budget chief, Miomia here. I thought I'd go through my testimony and then get to the exhibits.
Okay.
He's kind of jumping the gun on exhibit 1.
Oh, okay. So are you done with your testimony section?
Not quite. Almost. Getting there.
Okay. So if you can just give us highlights and summarize.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. You just went through. Current economic activity may be better reflected by the 24% decrease in general tax revenues and the 92% drop in TAT revenues in November 2020. As you know, the Corps will be meeting on January 7th to review its projections. Other revenues in exhibit attachment 1 reflects in FY20 the 648 million transferred from the EBRF to the general fund. In fiscal year 21, the 1,027.8 million reflects the 750 million working capital borrowing that we did. 203 million from the suspension of the TAT distribution. And my only comment here is that when it did its September projections, the Corps included 67 million to the general fund from TAT. And our best guess based on current collections is that the total TAT collections will likely be under 100 million total, which would go to the general fund. So the 203 million suspension may be optimistic at this point. But it's in there nevertheless, because that's how the consular revenues computed it. The 67 million to the general fund. So we added normally before the general fund gets anything from the TAT, there's 203 million in distributions ahead of it, including 103 to the counties. And then $80 million in coronavirus relief fund payments for eligible COVID-19 expenditures. It should be noted that the administration's financial plan does not transfer $183 million from the HHRF as is authorized by Act 9. In FY 22 through 27, the amount shown reflected revenue proposals that the administration will be submitting to the legislature as part of its legislative package. Executive branch other expenditures row reflects FY 20 $200,000 claims against state. In FY 21, the minus 196.3 million reflects 98.3 million of estimated 6 months furlough savings, which will not occur. 390.2 million in OPEB pre-funding savings, 204.8 million in COVID-19 related emergency appropriations, 82.5 million in non-COVID emergency appropriations, and 5 million set aside for claims against the state. In FY 22, the minus 84 million reflects 271 million of estimated 12-month furlough savings, 181.7 million in COVID-19 expenses, and 5 million set aside for claims against the state. In FY 23 and 24, the minus 272 million reflects 277.6 million of estimated 12 months of furlough savings in each year and 5 million set aside for claims against the state. In FY 25, the minus 21.2 million reflects 26 million of estimated payroll lag and after the fact furlough savings and 5 million set aside for claims against the state. In FY 26 and 27, the 5 million reflects set aside for claims against the state. The ending balance for FY 20 was 1,002.7 million. For FY 21, the ending balance after a loss of 498.2 million is 504.5 million. And for FY 22, a loss of 350.1 million results in an estimated ending balance of 154.3 million. For FY 23, the ending balance is 209.4. For FY 24, it is 437.9 million. And FY 25, it's 492.5 million. For FY 26, it's 242.5 million. And for FY 27, the ending balance is 269.9 million. In terms of the expenditure ceiling, the aggregate expenditure ceiling for all branches should not be a problem. The executive branch, which includes emergency appropriations for FY 21, as stated in the financial plan, exceeds the appropriation ceiling by 79.3 million. However, to the extent that these emergency appropriations can be reduced by stimulus payments, that number will be reduced. It's conceivable that we could meet the general fund expenditure ceiling for the executive branch as well. The general fund expenditure ceiling and executive branch appropriation ceilings is attachment 2. Article 7, Section 6 of the Hawaii State Constitution requires that whenever the state
Director.
Yeah.
All the members have your written testimony. So if I could request again, just to hit highlights, you don't have to read word for word items in your testimony.
Okay, but I guess my problem with this is not just the last couple of pages. The last one there says that you gotta you gotta provide for a tax refund or tax credit, right? You know, for that funny, that constitutional requirement.
Yes, we understand that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
somebody in your office is laughing.
No, I don't think so. It's hard for me to explain why that happens without going through that litany of stuff. And then on the attachment 3 says that the declaration, the finding says that we have, we're okay with the debt limit. Then just in summary, the biennium budget and multi-year general fund financial plan reflect our continued commitment to ensure the state's fiscal stability and long-term sustainability. You will be hearing the respective departments' details on their budget requests in coming weeks. The administration will work with you on a continual basis during the 2021 session deliberations on the biennium budget and the multi-year general financial plan. Thank you for this opportunity to make this presentation, but turning to attachment 1, I guess you just kind of wanted to reemphasize the ending balances that are important for bond rating purposes, that we have a positive ending balance to the general fund. Then the other expenditure adjustment line reflects the furloughs that are built into this plan for 22, 23, 24, and 25. And I guess that's all on attachment 1. Attachment 2, like I said, we may be able to meet the executive general fund appropriation ceiling depending on how much of the proposed additional appropriations can be covered by stimulus money. Right?
Hey, why don't we go through some questions and then
Just yeah, we'll go. Just one last thing on the
there's more.
on the page 6 of attachment 3, the debt limit at time of issuance and greatest amount of years principal and interest. If you notice that, you know, the debt limit currently is something like the difference between 994 and 1.43. As you go down that list, you will see it tightening toward the bottom there. Debt limit at time of issuance 1.389 and the greatest amount is 1.328. That tightening is going to kind of restrict our ability to issue bonds. That's why the bond amount is kind of smaller than it usually is going forward. About 500-600 a year. Okay.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
Thank you. We have questions from Representative Hope, followed by Representative Peruso and Representative. Go ahead, Representative Hope.
Hi, Greg. I did hear in your presentation that you guys had planned out for $5 million a year for claims against the state for many years out. So are we already planning for those things? Because that's a big chunk of money, especially when we don't have money. I mean, just in comparison, OHA only gets $16 million. So we're planning on having $5 million to just hand out for these things 5 years down the line.
That is just a number that it'll be just an estimate that we put in there. It's nothing. Yeah, and I think that to a certain extent is up to you folks whether you want to fund it or not.
But that's like a priority from your folks' point of view.
It's just something that we put in as a. It's not exactly a placeholder, but it's planning. It's just planning.
And I understand a lot of these things come out of accidents and stuff like that. But is there anything we're doing proactively to prevent the amount of this from increasing every year?
I don't know what the risk management people are. I have to see what the risk management people are doing with it. Do you remember if they were going more self-insured or less self-insured? I got to follow up on that. It's risk management is. I think I'll check with risk management, but that's over a Dept.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
To Rep. Russo.
I'm actually going to defer to Representative Kobayashi if he could ask his question. And
Okay.
then
Okay, Representative Kobayashi.
I'm putting my questions here on the chat line. Craig, can the legislature get the 15% and the 20% reductions proposed by the departments as given to BNF?
Yes. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think. I think.
It would help if I guess we can track it. It would help to know which of the department reductions were accepted by BNF and which were not. Thank you.
And I think Rep. Kobayashi, you had more questions. I don't know where the director went.
He went to answer his phone, I think.
Okay. Finn is questioning you right now. I didn't know how important it was. Okay. That was the one person whose phone calls I have to answer.
Tell the governor that he can watch us on YouTube, or tell your wife.
Yeah, he said that could wait. Sorry about that.
Yeah, Rep. Kobayashi had additional questions while you were answering your phone
Okay,
call.
Craig, in normal years, for bond rating purposes, we look to have a target of a 10% ending balance. Now, what is happening to that 10%? Are we still trying to meet that 10% ending balance, or is the bond market is the bond market also affected by COVID and those 10% targets are no longer in operation?
I think the most important thing is that we have a positive ending balance. My personal feeling is 400 million would be good, but because that seems to be what the IRS recommends. But other than that, it's it'd be good to have an ending balance of 100 million, 200 million or more. Yeah. For bond rating purposes, a positive balance is very important.
So we're no longer looking for a 10% ending balance.
No, I think they're reasonably happy with a few hundred million, would be happy with a few hundred million.
And is that what our bond counsel is saying, or bond consultants are saying, that we don't have to have a 10% ending balance?
Well, based on our recent bond issuances, I don't think 10% is required, but a positive balance would be highly encouraged.
Okay. So are we suffering and getting less? Are we paying more for our bonds when we have this lower ending balance? I assume we are.
We've been downgraded by 2 of the 3 rating agencies. One step but a stable outlook. The one that we weren't downgraded on gave us a negative outlook. So we're doing reasonably okay under the circumstances.
I mean, my guess is that we would be downgraded greatly because we would have lower ending balance, because we have huge unemployment, and with a only moderate improvement in that unemployment over the next 2 years. That would be my guess, that bond raters would really put us down.
Well, they're most concerned with getting their bonds repaid. So, like I said, positive ending balances would be a very good idea.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. We have Representative Peruso, followed by Representative Martin, and then Representative Wahlberger. Go ahead, Representative Peruso.
Aloha. Thank you for your presentation. I'm not sure if you were able to also watch the earlier part of the hearing where we talked to Dr. Tian and Dr. Bonham, but they suggested that it's really the poor who are taking the brunt of this pandemic and the economic crisis, and that the wealthy overall seem to be doing fine. And I'm wondering, I also watched the WAM hearing this morning, and I noticed that you were uncomfortable about addressing the revenue generation question from the senators. But I did want to get a sense of whether or not the governor is considering taxes on the wealthy. So wealth tax or higher marginal rates, income tax rates for the top 5% or something like that. So I know that you're not going to be pinned down today, but I would like at least some general direction, please.
On that one, I'm not sure. We've been working on a number of bills, and I'm not sure exactly what the governor intends to use at this point. We are reassessing how much money we can get off of special funds. And then that's kind of what's holding it up right now. Governor, yeah.
Rep. Peruso, are you done?
I am, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Martin.
Hi, aloha. Thanks for your presentation. I actually had a similar question, but since it was asked already, I'm going to ask, you mentioned restrictions on CIP funding, and I was wondering what the consideration was there, given that those types of projects tend to be economic stimulus and will help with our employment, et cetera.
It's really the debt limit. It's not we're self-imposing restrictions necessarily. We can't, the debt limit is relatively speaking going downward because our revenues are going downward. It's set as a percentage of our general fund revenues. And therefore, if the general fund revenues aren't going up, the debt limit isn't either. And that's the problem. There's like a 2-3 year lag, but we're running into that issue because it goes, what is it, prior 3 years revenues. And so we're not there right now, but it's not going up. It won't be going up for a few years because of what we're going through right now. So it's more the debt limit than, as opposed to us not wanting to.
Okay, Representative Wahlberger, followed by Representative Tang.
Thanks for presenting, Director Hawai'i. Appreciate your information today and your testimony. I'm curious about the Bank of America loan that was taken out last spring. What was the strategy behind taking a loan from a bank that doesn't even really do business in Hawaii? And what was the strategy behind the purpose for that? I'm also interested, I understand it's being prepaid, and what the prepayment penalties will be for that loan. Thank you.
those are actually bond anticipation notes. And Bank of America, the part that we deal with, you might be familiar with, it used to be known as, I think, Merrill Lynch. So we do quite a bit of business with them, that side of it. But basically the bond fund, the CIP fund was getting very low. And we felt that it was necessary to replenish it at that time, and also to pay back a loan from the general fund. So that was the reason for that at that point, because we hadn't issued GO bonds for about a year at that point. Subsequent to that, we took out a GO bond. We issued we did a 995 million GO bond issuance for CIP, which was what they call new money, but it's just for CIP. The next, and a few months later, we issued more GO bonds. 750 was the working capital loan, and 400 million was a refunding loan to refund 400 out of the 600 bond anticipation notes. So they're really only 200 million of the bond anticipation notes still outstanding. And that's not due till this fall, next fiscal year. So, which will be, redeemed then or prior to then. I'm not exactly sure what the, I don't think prepayment penalty is exactly the right word. I can give you the details on that. I'll get that to you.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. Representative Tam.
Thank you, Director Hirai. Always enjoyed working with you when you were at HHFDC. So it's good to see you here. So my question is basically, I was a product of Furlough Fridays under the Lingo administration. And prior to that, I know a lot of teachers were working second jobs, sometimes stocking the shelves at a grocery store. And we've heard that the economists have said that furloughs really hurt our economy. So even after all of that, I want to know, why are we still going through with furloughs? And is this really like the last resort?
Well, as you can kind of see, it is sort of the last resort. I mean, we've deferred, we were planning on furloughs starting January 1, and they've been deferred to at least July 1. So, but unless Democrats win tomorrow, or I don't know, what more we'll get from the federal government. We've got this problem of having to balance the budget. And that's what I was trying to point out, that there are furloughs going forward built into the budget for the next 3 years, something like that. So unless we can figure out a way to mitigate that, they're still in there, at least for right now.
Vice Chair, followed by Rep. Russo.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, Director. My question is, I know that some of your answers has been more generalizations about the budget. Can we get a timeline on when you'll be giving us more of an updated budget? Because just like how you answered Representative Tam's and Peruso's question, I wanted to know, because you said furloughs from January being put off to July because of federal money, which was an estimated 90-something million in your estimated fiscal year 21, and now it's off to July. When can we get more of a concrete or more of an estimated budget from BNF regarding this financial plan, or an updated financial plan?
A couple things, which we will do an updated, we will do an updated financial plan after the Council on Revenues, but also Robert's working with the fifth floor in terms of making a report on the federal stimulus money also. So we'll have a better handle on that maybe later on in the week or beginning of next week.
And then, will you guys have, I know you mentioned revenue bills that may be coming down from the governor's office. Will you guys be sending us down the governor's package on the revenue enhancements bills that you have based in your assumptions within this budget?
We're not ready to do that yet because we're not quite sure what the revenue, the revenue enhancements, which are not tax increases, and then they're tax increases. And we're kind of hesitant to go with tax increases. Like I said earlier, we're getting religion about looking at the special funds more closely. Governor issued an executive memo and we're waiting for the results to come back, telling people they better take a lot harder look at the special funds.
Okay, so when should we expect, this information? After January 7th, after CORE meets, or are you guys gonna be providing us, because that's in 3 days and we start session on the 20th, so that's in right around the corner. So we want to get an idea of what we're looking at.
When can you do? We're going to update the financial plan, right? By when? I'm talking to Neil.
Well, after we get the core meeting. But
so it'll take a few days.
Yeah, and then the other part is getting information more on the federal fund side.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how we're going to. We have proposed emergency appropriations that are in the financial plan, and hopefully, well, we're assuming we can back out some of them. We're just trying to get a fix on it.
Okay, so a few days after, so January 10th, we're looking at 9.
I'm looking at Neil because these guys have got to do it. So it's like.
Yeah, hopefully by the week of the 10th. Through the week of the 10th, we'll get something.
Okay, we will on the lookout for that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Before we go to Rep. Caruso, I think for our purposes, maybe the thing to do is we should do another briefing when Budget and Finance and the Governor's Office has a better handle on the budget, because it seemed like there's still a lot of questions. And I understand that you're not being evasive, you just don't know what approach the governor will be taking. So for instance, there is problem with your analysis. So number one, you said you're analyzing how much money is in the special fund, but part of your budget was to move a bunch of general funded position to special fund. So those are conflicting approaches. So maybe the thing to do is, it doesn't seem like, based on your statement, it doesn't seem like either Budget or Finance or the Governor's Office has a really good approach on how to deal with this budget. The other thing is you continue to discuss furloughs, but as you know, and this is something that the legislature said time and time again, furloughs can only be implemented to the extent of the contract period, and all the contract expire in June. And so unless you so technically and legally, the governor will not be able to implement any furloughs after June unless there's a new contract and that becomes part of the negotiation. So I think just kind of a logistical and legal and constitutional way to even deal with furloughs. If you don't do it in the traditional negotiate and ratify, what is your, because furloughs continue to be a big part of filling your budget hole. We would like a better explanation on how legally and constitutionally you're able to achieve furloughs, because we said time and time again, under the legal authority of the law, you can only implement furloughs only to the extent of the contract.
Okay, well, I'll have to, that's out of my, that's not my, I'll have to get back to you on that. I'll talk to Gov and, well, the Riker and those people.
Okay, but the problem remains is that because furlough numbers is part of your financial plan, you are the director of finance, and we are depending on your guidance and your numbers to balance this budget. So the answer that you provided that it's out of your hands is not a good.
Well, no, the legal answer is not I've got to consult with Riker and the AG.
Okay, so you don't know if it's legal, but I would think that's one of the first things that you should have figured out prior to relying on those numbers. So I guess that's number one, find out the legality of the ability of the governor to implement furloughs. And then the second thing is maybe come back to the legislature with your revised financial plan, because it seems like things are still up in the air. You don't know how much of the federal stimulus monies will be used to balance the budget. You don't know what tax increases you're planning to propose and implement, and you don't know the approach on whether to use special fund balances or whether you're planning to move general fund into special fund. So maybe a follow-up meeting. So Rep. Caruso, you have questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to, well, first, thank you, Chair Luke, for pointing out the contradiction in terms of how they look at the special funds. I think that is something that you'll need to address when you come back to us. I would also ask that you consider furloughs not as an inevitability, but as a political choice. It's a policy choice. And I would say that when you do come back, I'm going to have some questions about the contracts. For example, under HTA, they spend almost $100 million for marketing and advertising in an industry that we have become over-dependent on. And I will have lots of contracts about, questions about leasing office space for executive agencies from private property holders when we are moving to an age of telework. So I'm hoping that you do dig a bit deeper so that your first answer is not to cut personnel, because I do think the effects would be devastating. Thank you.
So it looks like it's becoming increasingly clear that maybe the thing to do is we should continue the budget briefing of all the departments, and after we're done with the budget briefing of all the departments, we'll call budget and finance back to do, so hopefully by then they would have finalized their financial plan and budget, and then we can through some of the discussion through the departments, we can have him wrap up on the whole financial plan. That sound like a plan for everybody? Okay. Not, any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Director, and we will schedule a follow-up after we're done with all the briefings. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good